Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez effectively declared war on corrupt conservative Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, and I am here for it, and we got to talk about it. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at in this video, but the context is Samuel Alito, the George W. Bush conservative justice, got busted again for flying yet another flag, this time at his beach home, and a flag that at the time was associated with the January 6th insurrection, much like the inverted U.S. flag that he flew at his house. So this is two back-to-back stories which further display the corrupt insurrectionary biases and inclinations that Samuel Alito has at a time that he's presiding over cases related to Donald Trump and the January 6th insurrection and the overall effort to overturn the free and fair election of 2020. So with that in mind, Chris Hayes on MSNBC interviewed AOC, and this is what she had to say.
What do you see as your role as a Democratic member of Congress in a Democratic House majority with respect to this court, specifically Alito and more broadly?
Well, I mean, I don't even think that we have to wait until we have a Democratic House majority because we have a Democratic Senate majority. And this is an alarm that I've been sounding for quite some time now. I think that what we are seeing here is an extraordinary breach of not just the trust and the stature of the Supreme Court, but we are seeing a fundamental challenge to our democracy. Samuel Alito has identified himself with the same people who raided the Capitol on January 6th and is now going to be presiding over court cases that have deep implications over the participants of that rally. And while this is the threat to our democracy, Democrats have a responsibility for defending our democracy. And in the Senate, we have gavels. There should be subpoenas going out. There should be active investigations that are happening. And I believe that when House Democrats take the majority, we are preparing and ensuring to support the broader effort to stand up our democracy. But I also believe that when Democrats have power, we have to use it. We cannot be in perpetual campaign mode. We need to be in governance mode. We need to be in accountability mode with every lever that we have, because we cannot take a Senate majority for granted, a House majority for granted, or a White House for granted. Every single minute matters, and we have to use our power when we have it.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Agree with every damn thing she said. There is something about the Democratic Party, not all of the Democratic Party. Think of the House freshman class of Democrats, right? People like Moskowitz, people like Crockett, Frost, Goldman, these new Democrats that are bringing the heat and the fire and energizing even the likes of Jamie Raskin, again, somebody who is seen as a statesman, a constitutional scholar. Even his attitude has become increasingly and appropriately more aggressive. And AOC, of course, she was kind of the progenitor of this, a few years ago when she was elected. Love this. Democrats, some Democrats, people like Dick Durbin, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, have an allergy to leveraging power. They are so reluctant to do it because they're well-intentioned, but they're feckless. They think, listen, maybe if we just behave, again, if we adopt the Michelle Obama ethic, when they go low, if we go high, if we can just keep going high, Republicans will eventually see the error of their ways, and then they will, see that we got to do things differently and the court will behave itself, and that's how it is. We have no indication of that. As Charlemagne the God recently said on The View, you got to take that play when they go low, we go high, and you got to rip it up. When they go low, he says you take them to the floor. You go to the floor with them. AOC's right, leverage power. Democrats have the Senate majority. They have the gavels, they have the tools. Their tools are limited, right? But they have the ability to start investigations, to hold hearings, to issue subpoenas. We have the White House. These are things that we have to leverage because I assure you, Republicans absolutely would. They would relentlessly leverage these tools if they had them at their disposal. And they may. We may lose the White House in November. We stand a really good chance. We may very well lose the Senate as well. It's going to be an incredibly difficult Senate map to defend. We have to defend essentially every incumbent and there are a lot in purple and swing states like Ohio and Montana where we may lose. And then we actually have to flip some states, right? Because Joe Manchin, West Virginia Democrat, he's leaving. That seat's going to be taken by a Republican. I digress. More on that in a minute. Then you also have a legendary constitutional scholar and constitutional law professor, Lawrence Tribe, who's also fed up with corrupt conservative Justice Samuel Alito. And he also makes the case that Democrats have not just the opportunity, but the civic responsibility to leverage power against Alito.
He serves not for life, but during good behavior. That's the language of the Constitution. It is settled that any judge or justice who commits high crimes and misdemeanors, and that certainly includes giving aid and comfort to an insurrection against the Constitution of the United States, which is close to treason, that any such person is subject to impeachment by the House of Representatives. Obviously, this House of Representatives is not going to impeach Samuel Alito. It is very much in league with Donald Trump. He controls Mike Johnson, but he's subject to impeachment and then trial in the Senate. The very fact that the House of Representatives will not do its duty is not an excuse for the Senate not to at least initiate serious investigation into whether impeachable offenses have been committed, and in any event, whether an enforceable, meaningfully enforceable code of ethics, enforceable by an inspector general, whether that should be enacted. That's something within the Senate's purview as
He's right. So again, more on this, but even Lawrence Tribe is saying that the Senate has the power and the responsibility to act, even if the House won't cooperate. You can't impeach because impeachments have to begin in the House. You need just a simple majority, but there's no Republican that will vote to impeach Justice Alito. And then you need a 2/3 supermajority in the Senate in order to convict. So impeachment's off the table probably forever, but certainly in the meantime. But Dick Durbin, who's right now refusing to launch any investigations, has the power to change course. And we're running out of time because the election is rapidly approaching. And by the way, this could be easily and even principally accused or used as an election issue. It's perfectly fair to make political hay out of a corrupt conservative Supreme Court justice, especially when you can make the case that if Donald Trump wins the election and if Republicans take control of the Senate, then they'll replace Alito or Thomas with younger versions of Alito and Thomas, younger, far-right, corrupt conservative justices who eagerly seek to strip away protections from American citizens and will now be able to do it for 30 years. But I also want to play this clip, too, going back to Chris Hayes. He had a really good summation of who Samuel Alito is. And then I want to show you some other things that are relevant to what Alito is doing now outside of January 6th and his corrupt insurrectionary inclinations.
And he is right. It was indeed all over the Capitol on January 6th. Just look. And while I don't think it is quite as vile a symbol as the inverted flag flying over the wreckage of the sacked Capitol, still, I think it'd be fair to say an explicitly political statement, right? And unlike the first case where one can take a normal American flag and turn it upside down because you, got into a fight with the neighbors, still working on that. In this case, Alito has to first acquire the Christian nationalist Appeal to Heaven flag and then take the action to fly it at his vacation home. Not so easy to explain away because you got into a tiff with another set of neighbors or to blame on your wife. This on its own would be cause for sanction for any federal judge who flew it. To be clear, if you're not in the Supreme Court and you did this, you'd get into a lot of trouble. Now, this time, Alito did not offer a statement to the New York Times. He clearly thinks he can get away with this and anything else, much like the ex-president, who he seems to want to bail out of trouble. Alito believes he can act with total impunity. He thinks of himself as covered beneath the veneer of nonpartisan jurisprudence and protected by lifetime tenure, and who's going to find enough Republican senators to impeach him. What this story reveals is what we've already known about Alito. He is indeed an ideological zealot and a flagrant partisan who puts his own personal politics before the law. And apparently, he thinks so little of us, the American people, he does not even have the decency to pretend to hide it.
Well said. Well said, Chris Hayes. A couple of other things I want to point out before I also remind people of the Constitution and how it works. Norm Eisen, a legendary prosecutor and judicial scholar, he also has this really long thread on X talking about what Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito, Samuel Alito, have done to benefit Trump here. The pro-Trump Justice Alito/Thomas access is openly complicit in helping Trump dodge justice. And he goes into, the discussion about the pending verdict in Trump's immunity case. We still haven't heard it. We may not get it for weeks, if not months. Who knows? There's no reason for delay on Trump's baseless immunity claims. SCOTUS decided monumental cases quickly. The Pentagon Papers, 4 days. Watergate tapes, 16 days. The Trump Colorado ballot status, 25 days. Took them only 25 days to come to Trump's defense on the 14th Amendment challenges. If the same consideration was applied to the J6 case, we would have had a decision ruling. We would have had a ruling by May 20th, and here we are at the time of recording, May 23rd. 28 days after arguments in the appeal of the D.C. Circuit's unanimous decision rejecting Trump's immunity claims, 101 days since Trump appealed, 164 days since DOJ originally asked SCOTUS to take up the case. There's no excuse. The truth is, we should already have or be close to a verdict in the January 6th federal case, which was set to begin in early March. With that trial estimated to last 8 to 12 weeks, it'd most likely be done wrapping up by now. But SCOTUS is delaying the administration of justice. And again, they go on into it. I'll also point out that the United States Supreme Court, with Alito authoring the majority opinion on a 6-3 partisan basis, struck down a reversed and struck down a lower court's ruling that South Carolina, a red state, had created racially gerrymandered maps. The court immediately below the Supreme Court said, the South Carolina did indeed draw racially gerrymandered maps. South Carolina, you got to undo it. South Carolina appealed. The Republicans did, got to the Supreme Court, and all 6 conservatives on the United States Supreme Court reversed the decision and then even disputed the facts of the matter, not even just the law, the determination, but the facts. And if you read this article in Democracy Docket by Mark Elias, it goes into detail. It's going to make challenging racially gerrymandered maps much harder in the future. And this court has already done quite a bit, the Roberts Court, to gut the Voting Rights Act and to make it harder to challenge right-wing gerrymandering. But all of this, the last thing I want to say is the Supreme Court, what protects them is the Republican Party has no interest in holding the Supreme Court accountable because the Supreme Court reliably delivers verdicts in cases which benefit Republicans. So they don't care if Clarence Thomas, doesn't disclose major gifts from right-wing billionaires. They don't care if Samuel Alito flies a flag, indicating support for insurrectionists, not only because this helps the right, but because the right-wing justices deliver results they want. But I'll remind you, besides of the indulgence from the GOP and the fecklessness, as AOC is pointing out, from some Democrats like Dick Durbin, right? So the thing that's helping Alito, that's emboldening Alito, all the elected Republicans who have his back, some feckless Democrats like Dick Durbin who are afraid to act, even when they have the power to do at least some things, but also this notion that the Supreme Court of the United States is a co-equal branch. This is something you hear a lot. That's what I was told in school, but it's actually not true. The word co-equal is found nowhere in the Constitution or in the founding documents papers. There are 3 separate branches. But if you look at the words of James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, key founding fathers, they wrote in the Federalist Papers and in founding documents, the judiciary was supposed to be the weakest of the branches. Not co-equal, and certainly not the most powerful, the weakest. Important, powerful, yes, but the weakest. That the vast majority of governance was supposed to come from Congress and the president. And now we have a court which in many ways tries to assert itself on the other 2 branches. And they also have this really weird notion of checks and balances. John Roberts and this right-wing conservative supermajority, they believe that checks and balances work like this. They can check and balance the Congress and the president, but Congress and the president can't impose checks on them. They think checks and balances works one way, from them unto others, that they can impose their will and meddle with the other branches, but the other branches can't reciprocate. It's insane. It's unconstitutional. It's ahistorical. And all we need are the right Democrats in place, like AOC, who are willing to take power and use that power and reassert the relationship and put the Supreme Court in its place and say, no. You don't get to be 9 unelected philosopher kings who rule from your Mount Olympus on the rest of us. If you're going to get lifetime appointment, if you don't have to worry about term limits and elections and all that stuff, then you have no right, none, to be political. You don't get to have a political opinion. You don't get to throw a political bumper sticker on your car or fly a flag a certain way. You need to be a robot. Democrats, Republicans in Congress, the president, they can afford to be partisan. They can afford to be political because they're political actors. They get to, and they're subject to the restrictions associated with political actors, elections, re-elections, term limits. If these Supreme Court justices don't want to mess with all that, then they don't get to have opinions. You don't get to be political. You don't get to be a Trump supporter. You don't get to be a Biden supporter. You need to be a robot, a monk. And the second you start to indicate that you're not that, then we, the political branches, get to impose our will on you and we get to put you in check. And that's exactly the attitude that Democrats need to bring to this. Because, of course, the reality is Supreme Court justices aren't robots. They're people. They are political actors, even the liberal ones, right? Of course they're political. So why shouldn't they be treated more like a political branch? Why shouldn't there be term limits? Why shouldn't there be mandatory retirement ages? Why shouldn't there be elections, re-elections? Every other Supreme Court in the states, because each state has a high court, each state of the 50 states, they have Supreme Courts. They all elect their judges. Those judges have mandatory retirement ages, term limits, et cetera, and so forth. We recognize, our laboratory of democracies recognize that these are political institutions and they should be treated that way. Instead, the United States Supreme Court wants no oversight, doesn't believe that there should be any checks and balances which apply to them. They get to do whatever they want, whenever they want, whomever they want, and you just have to deal with it. To hell with that. And we should demand that Democrats wield power against the Supreme Court, and we need to put those Democrats in a position of power to do so. Let me know what you think in the comments.